Casey Freeman, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about Gen Z workforce, the challenges they're facing, how we can better support Gen Z. And ultimately, like we have these 5 generations in the workforce simultaneously, and how do we navigate that successfully? So that's what we're really going to be exploring together. As we get started, I wanted to share Casey's bio with everybody. Casey Freeman is Global Senior Director of Talent Management at WalkMe, where she is responsible for the overarching employee lifecycle. Casey's main focus is on organizational development, succession planning, leadership development, high potentials, and executive coaching. Prior to joining WalkMe, Casey was Senior Manager of Talent Management at HireRight, a leading global provider of on-demand employment background checks. She holds a master's degree in organizational leadership from the University of Oklahoma, as well as a bachelor's degree in marketing from Oklahoma State University. Casey's focus is on the whole person, bridging connections and creating better conversations between leaders and teams. I love everything about your background. As a professor of organizational development myself, I think your background is awesome, and I would love to have you as a student or as a colleague in the workplace. Anyways, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we do that, anything you would like to share more about yourself, more about WalkMe, before we dive on into the broader conversation?
Sure. And absolutely, if you want to geek out on leadership development, I am for it. I really specialize in building high-performing HR organizations from the ground up. That's kind of like my sweet spot of growing that. And how I do this is really focusing on what's the organization's strategic priorities, what skills do they need to meet that, and do we build, buy, or borrow that talent in order to meet the needs?
Mm-hmm.
Really always thinking 5 years and down the line. So when we think about Gen Z, they're really growing into the marketplace. So I'm super excited about this topic as it changes and we go forward. And if I gave you a fun fact, I have 2 Irish setters, and I am currently attempting to learn how to do competitive agility. Not very good at it, but we're working at it.
Okay, I got to ask, what is competitive agility?
It's where you get the dogs to jump and go through the tunnels, and
Oh,
so
okay.
2 years of training me. The dogs are naturals. I'm the one that's in development here.
So like the dog shows, you go and they do the courses and all that.
We'll hopefully eventually get there someday, but
That is really cool. I have 2 dogs. I can't imagine they would ever be able to do that. But we love them to death. They're awesome.
yeah.
Okay, cool. And tell us a little bit more about WalkMe.
Yeah, so WalkMe is the leading digital adoption platform. It's trusted by leaders like IBM, Nestle, the US Department of Defense. And really what we do is empower organizations to maximize their ROI on their software. That's kind of a mouthful, but I'd love to give you a quick run through. Every
Yeah.
time we get new software, we get promised that that's going to fix everything. And it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. And on average, companies with 2,000 employees or more have 185 applications that they're running. And if it's not user friendly, or if you only have to go into it once a month, you're going to try to avoid using it altogether. And lots of times things are really, really awkward to use. It could take 10 clicks to do something like submit a time off request, something quite little. So WalkMe smooths it all out, makes it much easier. And in the world of, AI, there's also how do I use AI and how do I actually
Mm-hmm.
fold it into the work? So WalkMe has a new contextual AI co-pilot called WalkMe X that takes us to the next level with AI that everyone gets. And I think really resonates well with our conversation today.
So the name WalkMe, it sounds like literally means walk me through it, walk me
Yeah.
through the technology.
Walk me through it, and then but like better than that, like smooth me through it, like
Nice.
gliding through that technology.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. All right, well, let's dive on in. Let's talk about Gen Z. So sometimes I think, younger millennials, Gen Z, they get a bit of a bad rap. Um, Oftentimes they get characterized as being kind of entitled. They get characterized as being like drama, needy, all these kind of negative things. Um, as a professor, that's my main gig. Most of the time I'm at the university, I'm teaching courses, I'm interacting with young people all the time. I do consulting stuff as well. And so I am interacting, in professional spaces with executives and such as well. So I do hear those things from them, but interacting with students all the time, you know, I don't feel that way. I don't feel that way about younger people. Um, and so, but there's 100% this generational divide. And there's this friction, there's this tension, and you have these 5 generations in the workforce simultaneously who just, in many cases, see the world differently. They like to be led differently. They like to work differently. So, with all that kind of as a background and a context, like, what do you see as some of the major challenges that the Gen Z workforce is facing right now?
Yeah. What I think about Gen Z, they do kind of get this bad rap, but I'm an older millennial. We equally got the bad rap when we.
You millennials totally did as well. Yeah.
It's like the new, whatever's new, if we don't understand it, if we don't embrace it, then it must be different and or wrong. So I think what Gen Z is really facing is a rapidly evolving digital landscape. And then really with recent market events and unpredictable workforce. If we think about this age group, they're in between like 12 and 27. So we've got half still kind of growing and will eventually within the next, 5 to 8 years get into the workforce, and the rest are starting there. And when we think about Gen Z, they are digital natives. They can use all of the technology. They don't have any frame of reference without this, but they also have this real constant pressure that they need to update their skills in automation and in AI coming out to reshape how it is. And Deloitte did a study that said 49% of Gen Z workers are anxious about future career prospects. And this is largely, technology changing and moving forward. So they're entering the workforce. AI is really coming on the market. Markets are shifting. Technology is really advancing. And we have this dynamic of hybrid and remote environments. And if we think about how I came into the workforce, it's very much like you go into the office and you have your traditional roles and you have your you go to your team meetings all in person. And so they aren't getting some of that structure where they walk in. They're having this working from home, working remote, working hybrid, which kind of gives them a little bit less of a structure when they start their career.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. Millennials got the bad rap before. Gen Alpha is going to get the bad rap next. I think that's just the way it always goes. Personally, I'm kind of on the cusp. Like I'm what is sometimes called a Zennial. I'm on the end of the Gen X, the beginning of the millennial. I think it was an Australian sociologist who coined the term Zennial for that, like right in between. I'm a 79 birthday. And so I really relate to both, like Gen X and millennial. Anyways, like it's interesting as you think about these different age cohorts. And of course, anytime we're talking about big groupings of people, like age cohorts, it's silly in a way because no one's a monolith. Like obviously there's individual people with individual motivations and individual wants and needs and desires and personalities and traits and characteristics, right? Like at no point in time do I want to give any sort of indication that I think that every Gen Z is the same. Like obviously, people are unique individuals. We're just talking in the aggregate, like generally speaking, there are some of these types of trends, but obviously there's the whole gamut. There's the whole range of types of individuals across all of these age cohorts. There's all these subgroupings, subcategories, etc. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk more about creating a path forward through innovation using tools and platforms. You've already started to touch on this a little bit with AI. Can you delve into that a little bit further?
Yeah, innovation really isn't always about creating new tools, even though new tools
Yeah,
can
sure.
on the market. It's really about designing these platforms to meet the evolving expectations of a Gen Z workforce that cares about the digital experience. I am a an older millennial. I think we're called geriatric millennials. But we raised in the world of like waiting on dial-up. And so it would take 3 to 5 minutes, it would fail, I would wait again. And I was completely patient throughout this whole process. And now for me, if it takes more than 15 seconds to load anything, I close out the window and abandon it. And digital natives are even more impatient. They expect that it all connects, it all works together. And so organizations need to prioritize tools that streamline this collaboration and create an environment for real-time communication.
Oh, I lost you for a second.
We've all been there where we go into one system, you enter information, and then you have to go into a second system to complete a process, and you
Yeah.
have to enter the exact same information in again.
Hey, Casey.
This really connects if we let into like skill-based hiring. Like
Yeah.
we no longer need them maybe perhaps to be able to use a system, but we really need their skills to maybe change and go in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned, with digital natives, they just grew up with all of these technologies being rather seamless, user experience design, top of mind. They really just have super high expectations on how all this stuff is going to work together and interface. Um, I might have a higher threshold of what I'm willing to put up with than some people. And as you get younger and younger, that threshold goes down and down and down to the point where, like you said, you're going to close something out if it just doesn't work. And most of these processes aren't particularly user friendly. They're not designed that way. They're 10 clicks in, like you said earlier, or whatever. Or you have to like my biggest pet peeve, I think you just said this a minute ago, but like my biggest pet peeve is having to re-enter the same information like 5 times, within a few minute period, when things should be able to talk together, talk and communicate across systems, and they just can't, right? And it's because organizations often have 150 different softwares and systems, and they just aren't compatible. They don't talk together, and so finding ways to really help smooth that process out, like WalkMe, having that kind of a platform, having different tools to be able to do that, that's going to make all the difference in the world, because user experience design is what it's all about. So we talk about that from a customer experience standpoint. More and more, we're talking about it from an employee experience standpoint as well, because so much more. It used to be that if I needed to do open enrollment for benefits, I would go to HR, they would walk me through it, they'd help me do it. Nowadays, you're expected to do it yourself. Like, it's self-service. So you have to go into the system, you have to you have to figure it out, you have to click through all these different things, you have to select your options, and you better kind of understand what you're doing, and you better know how to navigate the system. Otherwise, you could kind of get screwed, and you could mess yourself up for the whole year, right? And so that employee experience, only a piece of it would be the systems, right? But and a really important part of the employee experience is how they interact and interface with these systems. And in a day and age where we're fighting tooth and nail for good talent, this is just one more piece that employees are paying attention to when they're trying to decide whether or not they want to stay with a company. And, they'll put up with it for a while, but if they have options and they get fed up with it one too many times, that could be the catalyst. That could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And now they're looking to go somewhere else because they're just fed up. And so that would be a silly reason to lose an employee, a really talented, capable, contributing employee, to another competitor, right?
Yeah. And I have actually, in doing interviews, have had applicants ask me, what is your software for this? What is your software for this? And they're actually checking to figure out what's the company's tech stack before they even sign up. And if there's a particular software that they don't like, and they find out that that company has it and that's going to be their primary software, then they may they may look elsewhere.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so how would you say you can adopt digital platforms to help the Gen Z workforce and beyond? Again, we're talking Gen Z right now, but we're going to get into Gen Alpha. I'm thinking about my kids. I have 6 kids, from my 2 oldest who are clearly Gen Z, but all the way down through my youngest who's 11, clearly Gen Alpha, who is like 100% digital native. What are we going to be doing in terms of how these digital platforms can work with these individuals as they enter the workforce?
Yeah, I have two Gen Zs in my house, both in that teenager getting close to graduate, and we're talking about career and future and what all that looks like. But when we think about digital adoption platforms and how they can really help the Gen Z workforce, it's really about this clunky enterprise systems that we've been kind of talking about here. And if it's difficult to use, they're not going to want to use it. And so digital adoption platforms coming on top of that to smooth it out. So according to McKinsey, organizations that integrate digital adoption strategies see faster onboarding and higher productivity. And that's what we want. We want our employees ramped quickly to full production. So for Gen Z, they may be really, really comfortable with consumer grade apps, but unfamiliar with all of this enterprise software that everyone in the older generations have been just using and used to using, and maybe even resigned, if I use that word, to particular software. So dApps come on top of it, provide that seamless learning curve that takes that complicated technology and makes it a little more user-friendly. But really, when we're talking about this, and you mentioned the younger generations, but the older generations are impacted too when we add digital adoption platforms on top, because it's really creating an inclusive environment, makes the software better for everyone. And that's really, as companies continue to go more and more into these sophisticated tools and more software and more spend, dApp's critical. It ensures workforce-wide digital fluency, especially in this era of AI, and digital transformation is just really accelerating and changing across industries.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, it's something every organization's going to have to think more about. I mean, honestly, I don't think I've come across an organization in my consulting work that isn't thinking about digital transformation. It's really just a matter of, do they feel like they have the resources, to do the type of integration that they want. I don't think any organization wants to have 150 different systems that don't speak to each other well. But it's a matter of how do you integrate them? How do you do it over time? How do you do it in a cost-effective way? Like that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing, and oftentimes these things have been cobbled together piecemeal over a decade or more, and it's not like you can unravel that overnight, right?
Yeah, you could also see where a company, maybe a certain function in the company is like, I really need a solution. Oh, here's a software that can solve that solution.
Yeah.
And then 6 months down the line, not talking across functions. And then they're like, oh, we need one. We're going to pick this one. And then all of a sudden you've got 3 payroll systems. And so if you're a global manager with employees across 3 countries, all of a sudden you've got to approve pay across 3 in 3 different ways. It really can just sprawl out of control almost before you realize it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has just been a super fun conversation. The time has flown by. I note the time. I am going to have to let you go here in a few minutes. As we start to wrap up, I do want to give you some time to just share with the audience how they can get connected with you and your team there at WalkMe, find out more about what you're doing, how to get connected, etc. And then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, so you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Name is Casey Freeman on there. I also have an executive coaching, so you can find my website at coachingwithsummit.com. If I gave you, a final word, is that organizations do need to attract and retain this young talent, and they're not. This talent is not always going to college first. I told you 2 teenagers. all of these teenagers in
Yeah.
these groups in my house are coming to me and saying, I don't think I want to go to college. And so we got to really think and evolve organizations beyond this requirement for a typical, degree education requirement. And we've really got to stretch how we're looking for talent. We look at the skill building instead of traditional roles. We look at the trade schools, apprenticeships. All of these things are really where Gen Z is looking. And leaders, we started at the beginning with Gen Z kind of, they want to be heard and they have an opinion. And so leaders need to evolve to focus on that whole person, show vulnerability, listen, encourage, provide mentorship, really upskill their own personal leadership so they can really make the new generation of the future successful.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Casey. This has just been a real pleasure. We could talk way more about this and way more about just the integration of these younger generations into the workforce, how they can work effectively with the older generations, et cetera. But this has been a really great conversation, and this is a good place, I think, to stop at this point. But the dialogue will continue, and I really encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Casey can do for you, check out WalkMe. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great